Welcome back, everyone. Ready for another deep dive?
Always.
Today, we're going on a journey to 19th century France and Spain as well. We're going to be uncovering the story of Maurice Lachâtre.
Interesting figure.
Now, you might not have heard of him before, but I think you'll find his life full of some pretty unexpected twists and turns.
Lachâtre's story is a really good example of how ideas, even controversial ones, can spread, sometimes in the most surprising ways.
Okay, I'm hooked already. Give me the rundown. What are we diving into?
Well, it all revolves around a rather dramatic event.
Ooh, I like dramatic.
A book burning.
Okay, hold on. Book burning. Now, this is sounding like something out of a history thriller. I'm in.
To fully grasp all the drama, we need to start with Lachâtre himself. He was born in France in 1814.
Okay.
And he found himself smack dab in the middle of Parisian intellectual circles.
At a pretty pivotal time, it sounds like.
Oh, absolutely. A period of huge change and upheaval. Think like salons buzzing with debates on socialism, critiques of the church, new scientific discoveries. It was a real melting pot of ideas, and Lachâtre was right in the thick of it.
So not just some quiet bookworm tucked away in a library. He was out there engaging with the big issues of his day. What was he like as a person?
Well, Lachâtre was known for his rebellious spirit and his unwavering commitment to freedom of thought and expression. It would land him in some trouble.
At that.
But it also really set the stage for his incredible journey.
Yeah, that rebellious streak, it definitely shines through in some of his early work. His book, History of the Popes, caused quite a stir, didn't it?
It certainly did. It was basically an expose of scandals and controversies surrounding the papacy.
The church was probably none too pleased.
Let's just say they weren't exactly thrilled with Lachâtre's tell-all.
Understatement of the century. I read that he was actually imprisoned and then exiled because of his writing.
That's right.
I mean, that's intense, just for expressing his opinion. What does that tell us about the intellectual climate back then?
It speaks volumes about the power dynamics of the time, The church's influence, the risks people faced when they dare to challenge the status quo. Lachâtre's experiences really show us just how volatile and restrictive the intellectual landscape could be.
Yeah.
But that exile would actually end up playing a key role in spreading a new and pretty controversial doctrine.
Spiritism.
Ah, Spiritism. Now, for those who might not be familiar, could you give us a quick explanation?
Of course. Basically, Spiritism is the belief that spirits of the deceased can communicate with the living.
Right.
It gained a lot of traction in the 19th century thanks to Allan Kardec,
Of course.
who codified its principles and practices. And here's where the story takes a really surprising turn. Lachâtre actually knew Kardec, whose real name, by the way, was Hippolyte Léon Denisard Reveil.
Okay.
Years before either of them became known for their involvement in Spiritism, they were business partners. Hold on. The man who ends up exiled for critiquing the church,
right,
and the guy who codifies Spiritism, they were business partners at one point. This is getting wild.
It's like something you couldn't make up.
I know, right?
They were both involved in a financial exchange bank in Paris. Just imagine the conversations they must have had.
Oh, I know. Before either one of them was like these central figures in the history of Spiritism.
Exactly.
This is one of those moments where I just think, wow, history is full of these crazy connections. Like, a seemingly normal encounter could lead to something huge down the line.
Yeah, it's amazing how these things happen.
So how does Lachâtre go from, this financial entrepreneur and critic of the church to, like, a key player in spreading Spiritism?
It's not a straightforward path, that's for sure.
Yeah.
The exile to Spain is actually super important here. While he was there, Lachâtre developed a growing sympathy for Spiritism.
Oh, interesting.
And he decided to really dig into it.
While in exile.
Yeah.
So he started seeking out Kardec's work. What happened next?
He ordered a shipment of Kardec's books, eager to explore these new ideas. But, fate had other plans, it seems. Because the Bishop of Barcelona found out about this shipment and decided to take some drastic measures.
Wait, are we talking about a literal book burning here in the 1800s?
You got it.
That's crazy.
It was 1861 when the infamous Auto de Fe de Barcelona took place.
Wow. Auto de Fe, I've heard of that, but to think it was still happening in the 19th century.
It was a public spectacle, intentionally meant to invoke the legacy of the Inquisition.
Tilly.
It was all about trying to stamp out Spiritism before it could really take hold in Spain.
What was Lachâtre's reaction to all this? I can only imagine.
Oh, he was outraged, of course. He saw it as this blatant act of intolerance and censorship.
I bet.
But the bishop's actions would backfire. I mean, spectacularly.
Oh.
And Lachâtre himself, without even intending to, would become a catalyst for spreading the very doctrine the church was trying to suppress.
Whoa. Okay, this is where the story gets really interesting. How did a book burning help spread Spiritism?
It's a great example of what we now call the Streisand effect. By trying to suppress something, you often just end up drawing more attention to it,
Makes sense.
making it even more appealing to people.
Yeah.
This happens all the time throughout history, even today. In this case, the bishop's dramatic censorship created a kind of forbidden fruit effect.
So instead of snuffing it out, the book burning actually made people more curious about Spiritism.
Exactly. Suddenly, everyone in Barcelona was talking about it.
I see.
And Lachâtre, the guy whose books were burned, he became this kind of symbol of resistance
Yeah.
against censorship. And he became a focal point for people who were suddenly really intrigued by these new ideas.
It's like that saying, banned in Boston
Right.
practically guarantees it'll be a bestseller.
It's a classic example of how unintended consequences can really shape the course of events. But Lachâtre, he didn't just sit back and stew over this,
Knowing his personality, I'd imagine he had a thing or two to say about it.
Oh, he did. He channeled that frustration.
Yeah.
He was a writer and editor after all, into this really powerful account of the whole auto-da-fe.
Smart move. Document the event, get his perspective out there for people to see.
It was strategic. He wasn't just venting. He wanted to, expose the injustice of it all.
Right.
And there's this fascinating point he makes in his writing. He argues that before he showed up in Barcelona, Spiritism was practically non-existent there.
Oh, really?
Yeah. It was the book burning itself, that act of intolerance that actually ignited public interest.
Huh. So he's saying the church kind of created the very thing they were trying to destroy.
Exactly. It's probably true to some extent. We have to think about the context of censorship back then. People are naturally drawn to things they're told they can't have.
It's like human nature.
Right. It makes them curious.
It's like that saying, banned in Boston practically guarantees a bestseller.
Exactly. Lachâtre, he got that. By putting a spotlight on the suppression, he basically exposed how ridiculous it was.
Yeah.
He knew that would be way more effective than any direct argument against it.
So what was the actual impact? Did Spiritism end up taking root in Spain after this? Or was it just, a brief moment of curiosity?
Well, it seems like Lachâtre might have been right about those unintended consequences. Despite what the bishop tried to do, Spiritism did start to spread throughout Spain.
Interesting.
And it wasn't just among everyday people either.
Really? It reached higher up than that.
There are stories of Spiritist sessions happening in the homes of government ministers, even reaching Madrid.
Yeah.
It seems like those flames in Barcelona couldn't quite extinguish the intrigue they had accidentally started.
So Lachâtre goes from exile to almost like a reluctant hero for Spiritism.
Right.
Inadvertently sparking a movement that makes it all the way up to the upper levels of Spanish society.
Yeah.
What a wild ride.
It's a crazy turn of events.
Yeah.
But, Lachâtre wasn't just passively swept along by all of this. He was an active participant,
Of course.
driven by his own evolving beliefs and a desire to actually change society.
Right. We mentioned earlier how he was trying to kind of synthesize Spiritism with other ideologies, especially socialism. How did that play out in his later work?
Lachâtre clearly saw Spiritism as a force for good, but he was also passionate about social reform. He wasn't content with just the spiritual side of
I
things.
wanted to see action.
Yeah. He wanted to see those principles applied to real-world problems like inequality and injustice.
So he wanted to bridge that gap between the spiritual ideals and practical action, a Spiritist with a social conscience.
Exactly. And this is where his perspective gets really fascinating and maybe even a little controversial. Merging Spiritism with socialist ideals, it's not necessarily a perfect blend.
Yeah, two pretty powerful systems of thought, each with their own baggage.
Right. And Lachâtre wasn't afraid of that friction. He was always testing boundaries, challenging conventional thinking, sometimes even contradicting himself.
This deep dive is really painting a picture of him as a complex figure. Not just a name in a history book, but a real person grappling with these big ideas, not always finding the answers, but leaving behind a legacy that reflects all those struggles.
Yeah, I think that's really important to remember. It's easy to oversimplify history, but the reality is always more nuanced. Lachâtre, he wasn't a saint or a devil. He was a product of his time trying to make sense of a world that was constantly changing.
And in that process, he became a pretty pivotal figure in the story of Spiritism, often in ways he never could have imagined. It's a reminder that history is full of these unexpected turns, and that attempts to control ideas, well, they usually just backfire.
That brings us right to the next chapter, Lachâtre's return to France and his complicated relationship with Allan Kardec.
Ah, yes. From business partners to book-burning adversaries, where did things go from there? Did they become rivals, reluctant allies, or something else entirely?
Buckle up, because this is where their story takes another wild turn.
Okay, so picture this. It's 1864. Lachâtre is back in Paris after his exile in Spain. And you've got Kardec, who is really making a name for himself as the leader of this whole Spiritist movement. Knowing their history, you'd think there'd be some serious tension between them.
You'd think so, right? I mean, you have these two strong personalities, a shared past that includes a pretty dramatic book burning and potentially some big ideological differences. Sounds like a recipe for, well, some conflict.
Did they clash? Or did they maybe find some common ground? What happened?
Well, what we see is something much more complex than just a simple rivalry. Remember, Lachâtre, even though he was trying to blend Spiritism with other ideas, he was still really drawn to its core principles.
Right.
And Kardec, he was always a pragmatist. I think he recognized Lachâtre's talent and experience.
Makes sense. So instead of butting heads, they actually ended up working together. What did that collaboration look like?
Lachâtre, with his background in publishing, he became involved in a really major project of Kardec's, the New Universal Dictionary.
Oh.
This was a really ambitious undertaking. Kardec wanted to cover all of human knowledge in this dictionary.
This is the same dictionary we talked about before, right? The one that might even contain an autobiography of Kardec.
That's the one. And it gets even more interesting. Lachâtre wasn't just writing entries for this dictionary. He was working directly with Kardec on some of the most important ones.
Like?
Including the entry on Spiritism itself.
Wow, talk about a turn of events. The man who helped spread Spiritism in Spain, maybe even against Kardec's wishes at first, ends up working with him to define it for the whole world.
It really shows you the complicated nature of their relationship. They had this level of mutual respect, even though they didn't always agree on everything. They both knew how important it was to accurately represent Spiritism in this huge dictionary.
It says something about Kardec, too, I think. He wasn't afraid to collaborate with people who had different viewpoints, even those who had challenged him in the past.
Right.
I mean, he was focused on the big picture, on really advancing the understanding of Spiritism.
Absolutely. And it's a lesson we could all learn from today. To be open to different perspectives, finding common ground, and working towards understanding even when there are disagreements, especially in today's world where everything feels so polarized.
Couldn't agree more. But even while he was collaborating with Kardec, Lachâtre, he still had that independent streak in him, didn't he?
Oh, totally. That tendency to mix Spiritism with socialist ideas never really went away. You can see it in his later works, like his new National Encyclopedia, where he praises Spiritism. That socialist influence is definitely still there, shaping his own unique take on things.
So even within the Spiritist movement, he kind of carved out his own path. A Spiritist with a socialist lens, always looking for ways to use those ideas to create real social change.
Exactly. He wasn't just following the crowd. He was engaging with these ideas, shaping them, pushing them in new directions. A true intellectual maverick.
And that's why, even though a lot of people might not know his name, Maurice Lachâtre deserves a place in the history of Spiritism. He wasn't just a follower. He was a thinker, a catalyst, who helped spread these ideas in the most unexpected ways.
I completely agree. His story is a reminder that history isn't just made by famous figures, but also by those who are willing to challenge conventions, spark debate, and sometimes unintentionally really change the course of events.
And it all started with that book burning in Barcelona. Who knew that a single act of censorship could lead to these amazing collaborations, intellectual clashes, and ultimately a lasting contribution to the development of Spiritism?
It really shows the power of ideas. Their ability to travel across borders, ignite passions, and find unlikely champions. It's a story that still has so much to teach us.
Well, as we wrap up this deep dive into the life of Maurice Lachâtre, is there one thing you'd want our listeners to walk away with? What's the key takeaway here?
I'd say never underestimate the power of curiosity, or the ripple effects that seemingly small actions can have, and how important it is to engage with different ideas, even those that challenge your own. Sometimes the most profound insights come from the most unexpected places.
Beautifully said. I hope Lachâtre's story inspires our listeners to dig a little deeper into the history of Spiritism, to uncover some of those hidden connections, and to really question their own assumptions about how ideas evolve.
Me too. Because as we've seen, the path of an idea is rarely a straight line. It's full of twists and turns, but it's always fascinating.
It certainly is. And sometimes those twists and turns, they lead to some pretty amazing collaborations and contributions that shape intellectual history in ways we could never have predicted.
Absolutely.
Thanks for joining me on this awesome deep dive. Keep those minds open and keep asking those questions.